The states. Worker-led benefits. Experimentation. Workers depend on unemployment benefits to navigate inevitable market frictions and seek new employment opportunities. But existing unemployment insurance UI is bureaucratic, ineffective, and unaccountable. The outdated system's myriad failures during the COVID-19 pandemic highlighted the need for innovations that respond to recipients' needs. The most promising avenue for innovation is to involve workers and private sector organizations more directly, freed from unnecessary bureaucratic strictures. Americans take for granted that unemployment benefits must be administered by government agencies, but other Western market democracies feature effective and popular benefits administered by non-public worker organizations. The next conservative administration should encourage UI innovation by capitalizing on a key feature of the system and principle of conservative policymaking: federalism. State governments already administer unemployment benefits and have broad discretion over their programs. Existing statutory language in the Social Security Act does not prohibit non-public organizations from administering the program, nor does it specifically authorize states to do so. Further, the administration can replicate state-level experiments in welfare programs and empower state officials to adapt UI to local conditions and needs. Approve non-public worker organizations as UI administrators. DOL should approve, pursuant to Part 303A(2) of the Social Security Act, non-public worker organizations as administrators. Offer waivers for suitable alternatives. DOL should offer waivers from the standard requirements imposed on unemployment compensation by Part 303A and Part 303D of the Social Security Act to states that propose suitable alternatives. Require organizations to comply with restrictions on political spending. DOL should establish as a precondition for receiving any public funds a requirement that an organization comply with restrictions on political spending as applied to 501c3 charitable organizations. Labor law. The federal laws governing labor management relations have barely changed in generations, and reforms on the federal level have been almost impossible to get through Congress. To modernize labor law, the Congress should pass legislation allowing waivers for states and local governments. To encourage experimentation and reform efforts at the state and local levels, Congress should pass legislation allowing waivers from federal labor laws like the NLRA and FLSA under certain conditions. State and local governments seeking waivers would be required to demonstrate that their reforms would accomplish the purpose of the underlying law and not take away any current rights held by workers or employers. In addition, waivers would be limited to a 5-year period, after which time they could be modified, canceled, or renewed. Excessive occupational regulation. Excessive occupational regulation, most typically encountered as occupational licensing, creates underemployment and wasted resources and artificially increases consumer prices. It is a significant problem that is difficult to address at the federal level. Congress should ensure that interstate compacts for occupational license recognition that are federally funded do not require new or additional qualifications, that is, qualifications that do not originate from state governments themselves, for licensed professionals to participate. Congress should ensure that well-qualified licensees are not locked out of the job market by restrictive government programs funded by the federal government. For instance, medical doctors must complete residency training to practice, And because Medicare provides funding for significantly fewer residencies than there are doctors, sizable numbers of MDs are locked out of the job market every year. Wagner-Pizer staffing flexibility. State agencies that administer unemployment benefits and workforce development programs should be able to hire the best people to do the job and should not be required to use state employees if a contractor can do the job better. Further, the federal government should not force a state to use non-union labor or union labor for these positions. Dahl should repromulgate the Trump-era staffing flexibility rule, and Congress should codify it. Worker retirement savings, ESG, and pension reforms. Remove ESG considerations from ERISA. Environmental, social, governance, ESG investing is a relatively recent strategy promoted by large asset managers that focuses not only on a company's bottom line, but also on the company's compliance with liberal political views on climate change, racial quotas, abortion, and other issues. The ESG movement has focused especially on reducing greenhouse gas emissions. For example, ESG proponents advocate for divestment from oil and gas companies or the exercise of investor influence to reduce oil and gas production. ESG considerations unrelated to investor risks and returns necessarily sacrifice trust law's traditional sole focus on investment returns for collateral interests. And while individual investors may prefer to invest in green companies, woke companies, or companies with greater board diversity, and may even be willing to sacrifice some financial gains to do so, the question relevant to DOL is whether, and under what conditions, fiduciaries should be permitted to follow this path as well. While Americans are free to invest their own savings however they wish, in ERISA, Congress imposed strict duties on employer-sponsored worker retirement plans as a prophylactic protection of workers' retirement security in general. Recognizing the unique status of employer-managed retirement savings, in ERISA, Congress required that fiduciaries exclusively seek the best interests of plan beneficiaries. Because ESG investing necessarily puts other considerations before the interests of the beneficiary, ESG investing by plan managers is an inappropriate strategy under ERISA. DOL should prohibit investing in ERISA plans on the basis of any factors that are unrelated to investor risks and returns. DOL should return to the Trump administration's approach of permitting only the consideration of pecuniary factors in ERISA. However, this approach should not preclude the consideration of legitimate non-ESG factors such as corporate governance, supply chain investment in America, or family supporting jobs. DOL should consider taking enforcement and/or regulatory action to subject investment in China to greater scrutiny under ERISA. Many large retirement and pension plans remain invested in China, despite its lack of compliance with U.S. accounting standards and state control over all aspects of private capital. Alternative view. Some conservatives believe that ERISA plan investments should be made solely on a pecuniary basis, and the consideration of any non-pecuniary factor, ESG or otherwise, should be prohibited. Additionally, other conservatives believe that even though ESG investing is often not a sound financial strategy, it is not wrong for retirement plans to offer ESG investment options so long as individuals explicitly acknowledge and choose to pursue investment options that do not exclusively maximize pecuniary gains. Thrift Savings Plan. The Thrift Savings Plan, TSP, is the retirement savings benefit plan for most federal employees and many former employees. The TSP is managed by the Federal Retirement Thrift Investment Board, FRTIB. At over $800 billion in assets under management, the TSP is one of the largest retirement plans in the world. Dahl should reverse efforts to politicize the TSP by removing mutual fund windows that encourage ESG and should clarify the fiduciary duties of the TSP. Recent efforts by congressional Democrats and the Biden administration to politicize the TSP by offering selective mutual fund windows that encourage ESG should be reversed by DOL, and the fiduciary duties of the TSP should be clarified by the department to preclude ESG investments absent individual stock selection by the participant. The TSP is managed under contract by private sector fund managers. Its current managers are BlackRock and State Street Global Advisors. Both of these managers have demonstrated a public commitment to use the funds they manage to advance ESG. The federal government should follow the lead of multiple state governments in removing their pension funds from fund managers such as BlackRock and State Street Global Advisors and contract with a competitive private sector manager that will comply with its fiduciary duties. Dahl should also consider bringing enforcement actions against BlackRock and State Street Global Advisors for their violations of fiduciary duty while managing the TSP. Congress should enact legislation authorizing the FRTIB to exercise its independent business judgment in exercising the proxy votes for its holdings of the TSP and provide clear proxy voting guidelines for the FRTIB to follow. The current proxy advisor market is dominated by two firms, Institutional Shareholder Services and Glass Lewis, which use heavily weighted ESG criteria in directing the proxy votes of pension plans. If feasible, the new legislation should also offer a streamlined process for other proxy advisors to compete for the TSP's business. As the principal retirement savings plan of America's servicemen and women, part of the FRTIB's fiduciary duties in managing the TSP is a duty not to invest in governments that are enemies of the United States. Yet the FRTIB has repeatedly approved the investment of TSP funds in Chinese military companies and state-owned enterprises. Under the Trump administration, DOL ordered the FRTIB to cease investments in China. However, under the Biden administration, the TSP has made available a wide range of investments in China. Dahl should exercise its oversight of the FRTIB to prohibit investments in China. Congress should enact legislation prohibiting investment of the TSP in China. Pension reforms, public pension plan disclosure. Residents of states that responsibly manage their public pension plans for state and local government employees, should not be responsible for bailing out states that do not do so. Money is ultimately fungible, so federal aid to states can effectively be used to free up other state funds for pension contributions. Although the federal government does not impose funding rules on public pension plans, these plans should be required to disclose the fair market value of plan assets and liabilities, using the Treasury yield curve as the discount rate on an annual basis. In the aggregate, these plans were underfunded on a market basis by $6,501 trillion as of fiscal year FY 2021, even though the plans reported underfunding of only $1.76 trillion using overly optimistic assumptions. Disclose the fair market value of plan assets and liabilities. Congress should require public pension funds to disclose the fair market value of plan assets and liabilities using the Treasury yield curve as the discount rate on an annual basis. Multi-employer plans. At the request of multi-employer union pension plans, the government has given such plans much more lenient rules and discretion over funding than it has given to single-employer plans. Multi-employer plans have been severely mismanaged, and the plans have abused the discretion and deference given them by federal law and enforcement agencies to make promises that they cannot keep. As a result, these plans are generally severely underfunded, with $757 billion in aggregate underfunding and a funding level of just 42%. The Biden administration has provided a massive taxpayer bailout to some of these plans, but without any needed reforms. Even worse, it gave out funds in excess of what the law allows. Congress should reform multi-employer pensions to give participants in these plans the same protections as those in single-employer plans. Liability should be measured similarly to single-employer plans. Workers should be able to earn benefits at any employer in the plan, but liability should be divided amongst employers instead of the current illusory joint and several liability under which no one is ultimately responsible for making up underfunding. Troubled plans should be prohibited from making new pension promises. More timely and detailed reporting should be imposed. Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation. The Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation, PBGC, ensures benefits for private sector pension plans with separate single-employer and multi-employer insurance programs. The PBGC's annual report must be submitted on time and with timely data that uses fair market value principles to calculate the PBGC's finances. The PBGC has been submitting portions of statutorily required annual reports many months late and using out-of-date data, and PBGC's data on plans is almost 5 years old. These problematic practices make it difficult for Congress to become aware of serious problems in the insurance programs, which received a bailout of over $85 billion in the 2021 American Rescue Plan Act. The PBGC should use existing statutory authority to protect workers, retirees, employers, and taxpayers by closely monitoring and taking appropriate remedial action with regard to badly run and underfunded multi-employer union pension plans, including termination where appropriate. The PBGC's refusal to use such authority helped cause its multi-employer program deficit to go from less than $500 million in 2008 to over $65 billion in 2017. Congress should increase the variable rate premium on underfunding and eliminate the per-participant cap in order to appropriately take into account risk and limit the degree to which well-funded pension plans must subsidize underfunded plans. Reform should proportionately reduce the fixed per-participant premium to ease the burden on well-funded plans and also increase premiums on multi-employer plans to match single-employer plans. Improving access to employee stock ownership plans. Employee stock ownership plans, ESOPs, are ERISA-covered employee retirement savings plans that allow employees to receive compensation in the form of equity in their employer business. These arrangements enable employees to formally participate as investors in how their employers' businesses are run. And they also align employer-employee incentives by giving employees a greater financial stake in the success of their employers. With over half of small businesses owned by business owners over the age of 55, ESOPs also create advantageous succession opportunities that support the continuity of local businesses and regional economic development. Finally, ESOPs can enable greater investment returns for employees. However, ESOPs have to date lacked clear rules under ERISA that recognize their unique structure and benefits, and this opacity can serve as a barrier to employers considering adopting ESOPs. Provide clear regulations for ESOP valuation and fiduciary conduct. DOL should make it easier for employers to offer ESOPs by providing clear regulations for ESOP valuation and fiduciary conduct that encourages the participation of employee beneficiaries in corporate governance while recognizing the importance of financial diversification for retirement security. Alternative view. Conservatives believe that it is important for American families to have control over their savings and to be able to hold diversified assets. While ESOPs can be a beneficial part of a worker's and family's savings, some conservatives believe that the government should not favor one form of investment over another or make it harder for families to have a diversified investment portfolio. Putting American workers first. A labor agenda focused on the strength of American families must put American workers first. As the family necessarily puts the interests of its members first, so too the United States must put the interests of American workers first. Immigration. The H-2A visa, meant to allow temporary agricultural workers into the United States, also suffers frequent employer abuse. The low cost of H-2A workers undercuts American workers in agricultural employment. The H-2A program is not subject to any statutory numerical cap and has been expanding in recent years, surpassing 200,000 visa issuances for the first time in 2019. Cap and phase down the H-2A visa program. Congress should immediately cap the H-2A visa program at its current levels and establish a schedule for its gradual and predictable phase down over the subsequent 10 to 20 years, producing the necessary incentives for the industry to invest in raising productivity, including through capital investment in agricultural equipment and increasing employment for Americans in the agricultural sector. Encourage the establishment of an industry consortium and match funding. Congress should also encourage the establishment of an industry consortium of agricultural equipment, producers, and other automation and robotics firms interested in entering the sector and match funding invested by the industry with intellectual property developed within the consortium freely available to all participants. Alternative view. Some conservatives believe that temporary worker programs help to fill jobs that Americans will not fill, prevent illegal immigration by giving farmers and others who hire low-skilled labor access to workers, and keep down the prices of food and other products and services produced by the temporary workers. Some argue that, absent the H-2A program, many farmers would have to drastically increase wages, raising the price of food for all Americans, and that even such wage increases may not be sufficient to attract enough temporary American workers to complete the necessary farm tasks to get food products to market, since those jobs are, by their nature, seasonal. Those who share this view argue that any plan to phase out the program should weigh the program's current costs, relatively low, and the program's current benefits, makes American farming more profitable and sustainable while keeping down food costs. Phase out the H-2B visa program. The H-2B visa for non-agricultural seasonal workers suffers from many of the same harms and abuses as H-2A, albeit of lesser scope because of its cap and distribution across many sectors. Congress should immediately cap this program at its current levels and establish a schedule for its gradual and predictable phase down over no more than 10 years. Alternative view. As with the H-2A program, some conservatives see the H-2B program as a valuable program that provides low-cost temporary workers in jobs that American companies, by and large, cannot find enough American workers to fill, e.g., tourist season childcare providers at ski resorts, swimming instructors at summer camps, housekeepers and groundskeepers at amusement parks, and extra summer cooks at restaurants that serve national park patrons. These seasonal jobs are less desirable to Americans who predominantly prefer year-round work. Labor shortages after the pandemic support this belief. Absent the H-2B program, many of these seasonal businesses would be forced to cut their hours or even close altogether. Any plan to phase out the program should weigh the program's current costs, relatively low, and the program's current benefits, make seasonal business more feasible. Higher American requirements. When government purchases goods or services, if at all possible, not only should the company be an American company and the products be manufactured in America, but the company should also be encouraged to hire American workers. Likewise, private employers should be free to prefer our own countrymen. Congress should mandate that all new federal contracts require at least 70% of the contractor's employees to be U.S. citizens, with the percentage increasing to at least 95% over a 10-year period. Congress must amend the law so that employers can again have the freedom to make hiring Americans a priority. Despite the significant advantages that preferring citizens over work-authorized aliens in hiring would provide to American workers, businesses, and the country at large, such a practice has been illegal since 1986. This makes no sense. Alternative view. Some conservatives believe that the government has a duty to limit its spending in order to limit how much it takes from American families. This means that when the government spends money, it must find the most economical and effective way to do so. Excessive government spending will be borne by American workers and families through reduced incomes and purchasing power. There may be good reasons to require a certain percentage of American workers on federal contracts, but those decisions should be based on economy and efficiency as opposed to arbitrary quotas. Visa fraud. American businesses that commit visa fraud and hire illegal immigrants should not be the beneficiaries of federal spending. But a 2020 report by the Department of Labor's Office of Inspector General, OIG, examined the department's process for excluding employers who commit visa fraud and abuse from federal contracts, and found much to be desired. To protect the American workforce from unscrupulous immigration lawyers, employers, and labor brokers, the department must follow the recommendations of the OIG and institute more robust investigations for suspected visa fraud and speedier debarments for those found guilty. International labor policy, leveling the international playing field for workers. As recent decades of intense import competition and offshoring have made clear, American workers suffer when the U.S. opens its markets to foreign nations' minimal labor standards and exploitative conditions. While federal law already prohibits the importation of goods produced with forced labor, the prohibitions are toothless without effective means of enforcement and cover only the most basic of workers' rights. The Trump administration and its United States Trade Representative, USTR, took unprecedented steps to redress the issue for workers. The U.S.-Mexico-Canada Agreement, USMCA, contained the strongest and most far-reaching labor provisions of any free trade agreement, FTA, with protections and commitments to reduce labor abuses and raise wages. It also established new modes of enforcement. For future FTAs, The USTR should replicate the labor provisions of USMCA, especially the provisions to eliminate all forms of forced or compulsory labor, protect workers' rights to organize and participate voluntarily in a union without employer interference or discrimination, create a rapid response mechanism to provide for an independent panel investigation of denial of labor rights at covered facilities, shift the burden of proof by presuming that an alleged violation affects trade and investment, unless otherwise demonstrated. For future authorizations of Trade Promotion Authority, TPA, the President should urge Congress to create mechanisms for supply chain transparency, institute a general prohibition on forced labor conditions, investigate foreign labor violations that undermine American workers. The United States' embrace of globalization has exposed American workers to unfair competition from nations with cheap, abundant, and often exploited labor. American workers have, as a consequence, seen their earning power erode. While negotiating stronger trade agreements with robust labor provisions should be the primary tool with which to regulate international labor competition, the federal government can also take steps to identify the worst labor abuses and rule breakers. DOL's Bureau of International Labor Affairs, ILAB, plays a critical role in monitoring and enforcing the labor provisions of U.S. trade agreements and trade preference programs, as well as investigating child labor and human trafficking violations. The next administration should focus ILAB investigations on foreign labor violations that do the most to damage American workers' earning power, specifically regimes that engage in child and forced labor, fail to protect workers' organizing rights, and permit hazardous or otherwise exploitative working conditions. Alternative additional view. Conservatives share a belief in protecting and promoting American workers and their families and orienting international policies with Americans' interests first. Some conservatives believe that the best way to put America first is by making America more attractive. In addition to restrictions imposed on other countries, removing existing barriers to American manufacturing, employment, and commerce can help American workers, entrepreneurs, and families. Organizational agenda. Budget. Reduce the agency's budgets to the low end of the historical average. The Trump administration's FY 2020 request, $10.9 billion, would provide a workable target for spending reductions for DOL, for example. Spending reductions should occur primarily in the Employment and Training Administration, ETA. Focus health and safety inspections on egregious offenders, as other inspections are often abused and usurp state and local government prerogatives. Personnel. Maximize hiring of political appointees. At its best, the Trump administration Department of Labor worked with up to 150 political appointees. That is still a tiny percentage of the department. The number of political appointees should be maximized in order to improve the political accountability of the department. Appoint new EEOC and NLRB general counsels on day one. The Biden administration broke significant precedent by firing the EEOC and NLRB general counsels despite their term appointments. The next administration should do the same and expand on the Biden administration's new precedent by refusing to acknowledge terms in other offices, where applicable, and installing acting or full new officers immediately. Implement a hiring freeze for career officials. A hiring freeze imposes financial discipline on agencies' personnel costs and reduces agency bloat. Office of Compliance Initiatives. DOL should fully staff the Office of Compliance Initiatives, OCI, which was reopened by the Trump administration after the Obama administration closed its predecessor down. OCI educates employers and workers on their rights, responsibilities, and available recourse under the many statutes, rules, and regulations administered by DOL. Most businesses want to follow the law, and OCI exists to make knowing the rules easier, which leads to increased compliance. Improve visa-related labor market monitoring. DOL's Office of Foreign Labor Certification plays an important role in the approval of H-visa applications, but it is currently housed in the Employment and Training Administration, which is DOL's primary grant-making division. OFLC should be moved out of ETA and made directly accountable to the Secretary with a politically accountable director. Conclusion. The good of the American family is at the heart of conservative labor policy recommendations. The long-standing tradition of a strong work ethic in American culture must be encouraged and strengthened by policies that promote family-sustaining jobs. By eliminating the policies promoted by the DEI agenda, promoting pro-life policies that support family life, expanding available apprenticeship programs, including by encouraging the role of religious organizations in apprenticeships, making family-sustaining jobs accessible, simplifying employment requirements, and allowing employers to prefer American citizens when making hiring decisions. Among the other policy recommendations discussed above, we can begin to secure a future in which the American worker and, by extension, the American family, can thrive and prosper.